The first thing you should understand about Lieutenant Commander Margo Keller is that she didn't mean to break galactic law, diplomatic protocol, or the Federation's most expensive piece of equipment. Not all at once, anyway. Margo was just doing what humans do best, improvising wildly when faced with impossible odds and finding solutions where better evolved species saw only problems. The fact that this particular solution involved what Federation officials later described as unprecedented violations of known physics was, in her opinion, entirely beside the point. 2 standard Federation cycles ago, about 7 Earth months, humanity had officially joined the Galactic Federation, a coalition of 27 sentient species united in their commitment to peace, scientific advancement, and endlessly complicated bureaucracy. The paperwork alone had taken 3 years. The cultural exchange programs were still ongoing. And the military integration? Well, that's where Margo came in. Every species admitted to the Federation was required to contribute to the unified defense force. Humans, with their bizarre combination of reckless courage and inventive problem-solving, had been fast-tracked for pilot training. And every pilot, regardless of species, was required to pass the flight simulator assessment. The FSA is the most sophisticated adaptive testing environment in known space, Admiral Chen had explained during Margo's briefing back on Earth. It evaluates your innate abilities while compensating for species-specific limitations. Supposedly foolproof. The Admiral had paused then, fixing Margo with what she privately called his "don't screw this up" stare. "You're our best pilot, Keller. That's why you're going first. The Federation is watching. Humanity is watching. Don't make us look bad." What the Admiral hadn't mentioned, perhaps because he hadn't known, was the strange new rule that had been implemented just before Margo's arrival. Humans were allowed only 1 attempt at the simulator. Every other species received multiple tries, sometimes spanning years of practice. Only humans faced this one and done policy. At the time, Margo hadn't questioned it. She'd assumed it was a compliment. Perhaps the Federation recognized humanity's natural aptitude for flight and wanted to challenge them. It wasn't until much later that she learned the truth. The truth that she, personally, had caused an entire subsection of Federation regulatory code to be rewritten. The truth behind what Federation officials now grimly referred to as the Keller Protocol. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Margo had spent her entire career pushing the envelope of what was possible in a spacecraft, top of her class at the Academy. First human to successfully navigate the Jupiter-Saturn slalom course in under 40 minutes. The only pilot to ever pull off the infamous Keller spiral maneuver during an actual combat situation. None of that had prepared her for the cultural minefield that was Federation politics. Or for the fact that, to most Federation species, humans were viewed as fascinating but deeply concerning newcomers, unpredictable, emotional, and possessing what one Arcturian diplomat had called an alarming propensity for solving problems by creating larger, more explosive problems. The Federation had rules for everything, protocols for every situation, and a flight simulator that had been perfected over thousands of years to test the abilities of a vast array of species, and from the crystalline Pyrithians, who perceived time differently, to the gaseous Veluri, who navigated by density gradients rather than visual cues. Surely it could handle 1 human pilot. Spoiler alert, it could not. The Federation Space Center hung in orbit around Proxima Centauri b, a gleaming spiral of impossible architecture that made Earth's most impressive space stations look like children's toys. As Margo's transport docked, she pressed her face against the viewport, taking in the massive structure that would serve as her home for the next few weeks. "First time at Central?" asked her seatmate, a reptilian draconian whose scales shifted colors with his mood. Currently, they were a curious blue-green. "That obvious, huh?" Margo grinned. "Your jaw is practically on the floor." His scales rippled with amusement. "I'm Sen, by the way. Here for the trade summit. Lieutenant Commander Margo Keller. I'm here to crash your simulator." Sen's scales flashed alarmed orange before settling back to blue. "You mean past the simulator, surely?" "At 2. Margo winked. After disembarking, Margo made her way through a security checkpoint so advanced it seemed to scan not just her body but possibly her soul. The Federation took security seriously, especially when it came to humans. whose history of warfare had raised more than a few alien eyebrows during the admission process. A holographic map guided her through corridors populated by beings of all descriptions. Some floated, some crawled, some appeared to exist partially in another dimension. Federation Central was a melting pot of evolutionary paths so diverse that Margo couldn't help but feel simultaneously proud and slightly insecure about humanity's place in the cosmos. She was so distracted by the passing parade of alien life that she almost collided with the imposing figure waiting at the entrance to the flight assessment wing. Lieutenant Commander Keller. The voice was flat, processed through a translator that stripped it of any emotional cues. I am Director Velthrak. You are 3 minutes and 42 seconds late. Velthrak resembled nothing so much as a mantis crossed with an octopus, balanced on 4 spindly legs with 4 additional limbs that served as arms. Their exoskeleton gleamed iridescent blue under the lights, and compound eyes studied Margo with unnerving intensity. Sorry, Director. Got a bit turned around in the diplomatic sector. Margo offered her hand before remembering that not all species appreciated the gesture. She awkwardly converted the motion into a salute. Follow me. Velthrak turned without acknowledging either gesture. The other candidates are already preparing. Margo hurried to keep pace with the director's surprisingly swift gait. Other candidates. I thought I was the only one testing today. You are the only human. There are 6 other species represented in today's cohort. They have all been preparing for this assessment for a minimum of 3 standard cycles. Margo did the math. Wait, they've been practicing for over 2 years? Correct. The Florian candidate has spent 7 cycles in preparation. 7 years? For a flight simulator test? Velthrak's appendages twitched in what might have been irritation. The Federation Flight Simulator Assessment is not a test, Commander. It is the most sophisticated evaluation protocol in known space. It adapts to the neurological, physiological, and perceptual parameters of each species to create a perfectly calibrated experience. They arrived at a large observation deck overlooking what appeared to be a series of enclosed pods. Through transparent walls, Margo could see pilots of various species engaged in what looked like pre-flight meditation rituals. These candidates are completing their final preparations. Velthrak explained, you will be the last to attempt the simulation today. A lanky, silver-skinned being approached, moving with the fluid grace of Mercury. Is this the human pilot? It asked, voice melodious even through the translator. Yes, Velthrak replied. Lieutenant Commander Margo Keller, this is Nix Von, our simulator calibration specialist. Nix Von regarded Margo with glittering eyes that seemed to contain galaxies. Fascinating. We've had to make significant adjustments to accommodate human physiological responses. Your species' reaction times are unusual. Unusual good or unusual bad? Margo asked. Simply unusual. Humans have slower base reaction times than many species, yet demonstrate remarkable anticipatory capabilities and pattern recognition. Your visual processing prioritizes movement over detail, and your proprioception relies heavily on inner ear function rather than electromagnetic field sensing. That sounds about right. Margo wasn't entirely sure what proprioception was, but she wasn't about to admit it. Most curious is your species' tendency toward what we call intuitive leaps, decisions made without complete data sets. The simulator has been programmed to compensate for this inefficiency. Margo bit back a retort. This wasn't the time to defend humanity's shoot first, ask questions later approach to problem solving, even if that approach had saved her life more times than she could count. I'm sure it'll be fine, she said instead, watching as a tentacled pilot emerged from one of the pods, its appendages drooping in what appeared to be dejection. Candidate Morkstal has failed their 5th attempt, Velthrak noted dispassionately. They will be permitted to try again in 6 months. Margo frowned. But I only get 1 shot, right? Why is that? Velthrak and Nix Von exchanged a look that Margo couldn't interpret. Federation protocol, Velthrak said finally. Now, shall we proceed to your orientation? The briefing room resembled a cross between an operating theater and a meditation chamber. Curved walls displayed real-time data on atmospheric conditions, gravitational fields, and astronomical phenomena from across the galaxy. In the center, a holographic projection of what Margo assumed was the simulation environment rotated slowly. 5 Federation officials sat in a semicircle, each representing a different species and department. Velthrak took the center position. Lieutenant Commander Keller began a bulbous being with translucent skin through which pulsed luminescent organs. I am Admiral Phlox of the Federation Flight Standards Commission. We understand this is your first exposure to our technology, so we will attempt to explain in simplified terms. Margo forced her face into a neutral expression. She'd been warned about this. Many Federation species equated humanity's youth as a spacefaring civilization with intellectual immaturity. The simulation you are about to experience, continued Phlox, has been calibrated to what our systems suggest is the upper limit of human capability. Please do not be discouraged when you encounter difficulty. When, not if, Margo noted. Confidence inspiring. A ripple passed through Phlox's internal organs that the translator didn't interpret. Another official, this one resembling a feathered serpent coiled around a floating chair, spoke up. The parameters include navigation through a Class 9 asteroid field, evasion of simulated hostiles, and emergency landing procedures on a variety of planetary bodies. Sounds straightforward enough, Margo replied, studying the hologram. The flight path looked challenging but not impossible. For most species, perhaps, said a third official, voice dripping with condescension, even through the translator. But given humanity's limited experience with non-Earth gravitational conditions and your innate biological constraints. What my colleague means, interrupted a new voice from the doorway, is that the simulation presents unique challenges to each species. No offense is intended. Margo turned to see perhaps the most human-like alien she'd encountered, yet bipedal, with copper-toned skin and feathery crests where hair would be on a human. Their eyes were solid black, without discernible pupils. Commander Plex, said Velthrak, with what sounded like resigned irritation, but I was not aware you would be joining us. I requested observer status for the human trials, Plex replied, taking an empty seat. My species was the last admitted before humans. I thought I might offer perspective. Margo shot Plex a grateful look. The alien gave what might have been a wink, though with those eyes it was hard to tell. Very well, Velthrak continued. Lieutenant Commander, the technical specifications of the simulator are as follows. What followed was a 40-minute lecture on neurological interface protocols, gravitational compensation algorithms, and reaction time calibration metrics that seemed deliberately designed to make Margo's eyes glaze over. The hologram shifted to display increasingly complex flight paths and obstacle courses. Out about halfway through, Margo raised her hand. Yes, Commander. Velthrak paused. Just to clarify, will I be flying an Earth-type craft in the simulation, or a Federation standard vessel? The officials exchanged glances. The simulator generates a hybrid control system, explained Nixvon. It will possess elements familiar to you, but will fundamentally operate according to Federation principles. So, neither, Margo translated. I'll be flying an alien ship with controls I'd never used before. That is correct. Bay. And you're testing my piloting abilities based on this. We are testing your adaptability, spatial reasoning, and decision-making under pressure, corrected Admiral Phlox. All pilots must demonstrate these qualities regardless of the vessel. Margo nodded slowly. And what's the pass rate for first-time candidates? Another uncomfortable silence. Approximately 8%. Velthrak finally admitted. 8%? Margo whistled. No wonder everyone practices for years. Which brings us to your behavioral expectations, the feathered serpent interjected. While in the simulator, you will follow all Federation protocols. Any deviation will result in immediate disqualification. Define deviation, Margo said. Unorthodox maneuvers. Violations of standard Federation flight paths. ignoring simulator warnings. The usual human tendencies, the serpent replied dryly. Margo bit her tongue. If they'd already written her off as a failure, there was no point arguing. As the briefing concluded, Commander Plex approached. "Don't let them intimidate you," they said quietly. "The simulator is challenging, but not impossible." "Any tips for a first-timer?" Margo asked. Plex's expression was unreadable, but their voice carried a hint of amusement. "The simulation is designed to adapt to how you think. So perhaps, don't think like they expect you to." Before Margo could ask what that meant, Velthrak announced it was time to proceed to the simulator chamber. "One last question," Margo said as they walked. "What happens if I fail?" "You will be assigned to non-flight duties within the Federation," Velthrak replied. "Many species find their true calling in administrative or diplomatic roles." The thought of being grounded for the rest of her career made Margo's stomach clench. Whatever this simulation threw at her, she would have to overcome it. Humanity's reputation in the stars might depend on it. The simulator pod looked innocent enough from the outside, a sleek, egg-shaped capsule with a single-entry hatch. Inside was another story. The interior shifted and reconfigured before Margo's eyes, surfaces flowing like liquid metal until they formed what approximated a pilot's station, albeit one designed by someone with only a passing familiarity with human ergonomics. "The neural interface will activate once you are seated," Nixvon explained, hovering at the entrance. "You may experience momentary disorientation." "Anything else I should know?" Margo asked, eyeing the fluid chair that seemed altogether too alive for her comfort. "Try not to panic," Nixvon said helpfully. "Human stress responses tend to trigger cascade failures in the adaptive systems." "No pressure," Margo muttered. "Indeed. Pressure is fully regulated within the chamber." The translator apparently missed sarcasm. When Nixvon departed, sealing the hatch behind them, Margo took a deep breath and lowered herself into the chair. It immediately conformed to her body, wrapping around her in a way that was simultaneously comforting and slightly creepy. A gentle hum filled the chamber, and Margo felt a tingling sensation at the base of her skull. The walls of the pod seemed to melt away, replaced by a startlingly realistic view of deep space. Stars stretched in every direction, and a massive ringed planet loomed in the distance. "Neural interface calibration complete," announced a pleasant voice. "Welcome, Lieutenant Commander Keller. Simulation will commence in 3, 2, 1. Reality shifted. Suddenly, Margo wasn't just looking at space, she was in it, encased in a spacecraft that responded to her thoughts as much as her touch. The control panel before her featured elements familiar from Earth ships, but arranged in alien configurations. Displays showed readings she couldn't immediately decipher. "First task, navigate from current position to waypoint Alpha," the voice instructed. A glowing marker appeared in the distance. "Simple enough," Margo said, reaching for what she assumed was the propulsion control. The ship lurched forward with unexpected force, sending her stomach into her throat. The sensitivity was all wrong, a slight touch translated to major movement. Margo quickly adjusted, easing back on the control. "Uneven acceleration pattern detected," the simulator commented, compensating for human reaction time lag. Margo frowned. The ship now felt sluggish, as if moving through molasses. She increased power, and the craft barely responded. "This is ridiculous," she muttered, pushing the control to maximum. The ship crawled forward. From the observation deck, the Federation officials watched with various expressions of confirmation bias. Humans, clearly, were not natural pilots by Federation standards. Margo reached waypoint Alpha after struggling with the increasingly unresponsive controls. The next task appeared: navigate asteroid field while maintaining Federation standard safety margins. Before her appeared a dense field of tumbling rocks, some as large as mountains. A glowing pathway indicated the recommended route through a winding, overcautious path that would take 3 times as long as necessary. Margo tried to deviate from the suggested path, aiming for a clear gap between 2 larger asteroids. The ship refused to respond. Safety protocols engaged. the simulator announced. The course correction applied. Override safety protocols, Margo commanded. Override denied. Human judgment assessed as suboptimal for current conditions. But Margo's frustration mounted. The simulator wasn't testing her abilities, it was constraining them based on preconceived notions of human limitations. As she followed the painfully slow prescribed route, a realization dawned. The simulator was adapting to her, yes, but it was adapting incorrectly. It interpreted her human reflexes and decision-making as errors to be corrected rather than valid approaches to be accommodated. The next challenge involved evading hostile entities' glowing red spheres that pursued her ship through a nebula. The recommended tactic was to maintain distance and outrun them using sustained thrust. Margo had a better idea. "Computer, are we in a simulation or not?" she asked. "Affirmative. This is a Federation flight simulator assessment." "Then my life isn't actually in danger, correct?" A pause. "Physical harm is impossible within the simulation environment." "Perfect." Margo grinned. "Disable all safety protocols. Authorization, Keller, Lieutenant Commander, Earth Defense Force. A warning: disabling safety protocols is not recommended for human pilots." "Yeah, well, neither is treating us like we've never flown before." "Override." Another pause, longer this time. "Then, safety protocols disabled. Federation Assessment Commission notified of protocol violation." In the observation room, alarms began to sound. On her newly liberated ship, Margo felt the controls come alive under her hands. No more computer-imposed limitations, no more recommended paths. Just Margo, the ship, and the challenge before her. She spun the craft in a maneuver that would have been physically impossible in a real vessel, diving straight toward the nearest hostile entity. At the last possible moment she pulled up, causing two pursuers to collide with each other. "Warning: simulation parameters exceeded," the computer announced. "Good," Margo replied, executing a corkscrew turn that sent her ship dancing between nebula filaments. "Now we're getting somewhere." In the observation deck, chaos reigned. "What is she doing?" demanded Admiral Phlox, internal organs flashing warning colors. "Those maneuvers aren't in any Federation flight manual." Nix Von's fingers flew over control panels. "The simulator is having difficulty calculating response parameters. The human is improvising." "Improvising?" Velthrak's appendages twitched violently. "This is a standardized assessment." Commander Plex leaned forward, watching the displays with evident fascination. "Remarkable. She's treating the entire simulation as a game rather than a test." On the main screen, Margo's ship performed a sequence of maneuvers that caused several observers to flinch. She'd abandoned all pretense of following Federation protocols, instead flying by pure instinct and what could only be described as audacity. The simulation had moved into its crisis response phase. Margo's ship now faced a catastrophic engine failure while in orbit around a volatile gas giant. Standard procedure called for a controlled descent to a designated emergency landing zone on a nearby moon. Margo took one look at the suggested flight path and laughed. "Computer, reroute all remaining power to forward shields," she ordered. "Warning: this action contradicts Emergency Protocol Gamma 7. "Noted. Do it anyway." Inside the simulator pod, Margo felt the ship shudder as she aimed it directly at the gas giant's turbulent upper atmosphere. Federation pilots were trained to avoid planetary atmospheres during engine failures. Margo had other ideas. "She's going to use the atmosphere for a gravitational slingshot," Plex realized aloud. "With a failing engine." "Impossible," declared the feathered serpent official. "The gravitational forces would tear the ship apart." "Not if she hits it at precisely the right angle," Plex countered. Margo's ship skimmed the gas giant's outer atmosphere, the shields glowing white-hot with friction. Alarms blared, warning of imminent structural failure, but Margo had calculated, or more accurately, intuited the perfect trajectory. The massive planet's gravity accelerated the crippled ship, flinging it precisely toward the emergency landing zone. The simulator wasn't programmed for this approach, Nixvon said, voice rising in pitch. It's trying to calculate physics models beyond its parameters. On the displays, warning lights flashed as the simulator's quantum processors struggled to keep up with Margo's unorthodox solution. Shut it down, ordered Vel Thrak. We can't, replied Nixvon. Not while a candidate is mid-assessment, with the neural interface. The next challenge appeared: navigate through an intensifying radiation storm to reach a rescue vessel. The recommended path led away from the storm, adding hours to the journey. Margo, of course, went straight through. Computer, polarized the hull to deflect radiation particles, she commanded. This vessel is not equipped with polarization capability, the simulator responded. Then rewrote power from life support to create an electromagnetic field around the ship. A warning: this would result in oxygen depletion within 17 minutes. I only need 5, Margo replied confidently. In the observation room, a technician shouted, the simulator is attempting to model a theoretical electromagnetic shield generated from life support systems. It's overloading the quantum matrix. Displays flickered. The holographic representation of Margo's ship began to break apart into fragmenting code. How is this possible? Demanded Admiral Phlox. The simulator has modeled over 3 million flight scenarios. Yes, said Plex with what might have been admiration, but none of them were flown by a human operating on pure adrenaline and spite. Inside the pod, Margo was unaware of the havoc she was wreaking on the Federation's most advanced technology. She was in the zone, responding to each challenge with solutions that bypassed conventional approaches in favor of what humans did best: creative improvisation under pressure. For the final challenge, docking with a moving space station during a solar flare, Margo decided to ignore the docking protocols entirely. Instead, she calculated a collision course that would bring her disabled ship into the station's emergency capture field. Lieutenant Commander, this is Director Vel Thrak. A voice suddenly cut through the simulation. Cease your current approach immediately. No can do, Director, Margo replied. I'm committed to this trajectory. The simulator cannot process. Whatever the simulator couldn't process was lost as the entire system crashed spectacularly. The immersive environment inside the pod dissolved into pixelated chaos before going completely dark. In the observation deck, displays exploded in cascading failure warnings before shutting down completely. The room's lights flickered and died, plunging the stunned officials into emergency illumination. What just happened? Demanded Admiral Phlox. Nixvon stared at the dead systems in shock. She broke it. The human broke the simulator. 3 hours later, Margo sat in a Federation debriefing room, facing a panel of officials whose expressions ranged from outrage to reluctant fascination. Emergency technical teams still worked to restore the simulator systems. Let me get this straight, Margo said, breaking the tense silence. I'm the first pilot to ever crash the simulator itself. Not just fail the simulation, but actually break the entire system. In the 642 years since the Advanced Neural Flight Assessment System was implemented, Vel Thrak replied stiffly, no candidate has ever caused a complete quantum matrix collapse. So, is that a pass or a fail? Margo asked. Admiral Phlox's translucent body pulsed with what might have been incredulity. Lieutenant Commander, you violated 17 Federation flight protocols, ignored all safety parameters, and destroyed equipment valued at more than the entire gross domestic product of your planet's largest nation. But interjected Commander Plex, who had somehow secured a place on the panel, she also demonstrated problem-solving abilities that the simulator itself couldn't anticipate. That was the point of the assessment, was it not? To evaluate a pilot's ability to handle unexpected situations? By following protocols, insisted the feathered serpent official. Protocols designed by species with very different evolutionary histories than humans, Plex countered. Perhaps what we witnessed today was not a failure of the human, but a failure of our own assumptions. A heated debate followed in multiple languages, with the translation system struggling to keep up. Margo caught phrases like recalibration requirements, human unpredictability factor, and budgetary implications. Finally, Velthrak raised all four arms for silence. The Federation Flight Standards Commission has reached a decision. They announced, Lieutenant Commander Keller has technically passed the assessment, as she successfully navigated all challenges, albeit through unconventional means. Margo suppressed a victory smile. However, Velthrak continued, due to the unprecedented strain placed on the simulation systems, a new regulation will be implemented immediately, and human pilots will be restricted to one attempt at the assessment. Because we might break it again? Margo asked. Precisely. Furthermore, future human candidates will be assessed in an isolated system with additional computational redundancies. Admiral Phlox floated forward. There is also the matter of your assignment, Lieutenant Commander. Given your unique approach to piloting, standard deployment would be inappropriate. Margo's heart sank. This was it, she was about to be grounded. Instead, Phlox continued, you will be assigned to the Federation Flight Training Division as a tactical instructor. I'm sorry, what? Margo blinked. The Commander Plex's expression might have been a smile. The Federation recognizes value when it sees it, Commander Keller. Your approach to problem-solving, while terrifying to witness, represents a perspective our pilots have never encountered. You want me to teach other species to fly like a human? Margo asked, incredulous. Not exactly, clarified Velthrak. We want you to expand their conceptual framework, to introduce what you might call human intuition into their training. And perhaps, added Plex, to help us redesign a simulator that can actually handle the full range of sentient problem-solving approaches. 6 months later, Margo stood in the newly constructed human approach training facility, facing a class of alien pilots from across the Federation. Behind her, a holographic display showed the now infamous simulation run that had crashed the Federation's most sophisticated computer system. Welcome to thinking outside the spaceship, she began. I'm Lieutenant Commander Margo Keller, and today we're going to learn why sometimes the best way to solve a problem is to break all the rules trying to solve it for you. A draconian pilot raised a scaled hand. Is it true that humans make critical flight decisions based on what you call gut feelings? Sometimes, Margo admitted, though we prefer the term intuitive heuristic processing. And this is effective? Asked a crystalline being skeptically. Margo grinned. Let me put it this way, there's a reason human pilots only get one shot at the simulator. By the time you complete this course, you'll understand why. In the observation room, Commander Plex and Director Velthrak watched the class with cautious optimism. Are we certain this is wise? Velthrak asked, teaching non-humans to think like humans. The Federation has thrived for millennia by incorporating diverse perspectives, Plex replied. Humans may be chaotic, unpredictable, and occasionally terrifying, but they solve problems in ways we would never consider. That's what concerns me, Velthrak admitted. What happens when they start applying this human intuition to other Federation systems? Plex made the gesture that passed for a shrug in their species. Progress, most likely. Messy, disruptive, wonderful progress. Below, Margo was explaining the concept of winging it to her bewildered class. Sometimes, she told them, the best solution isn't in any manual. Sometimes, you just have to trust yourself, break a few rules, and hope for the best. The Federation would never be the same, and that, as humans would say, was entirely the point.